Sair da escola já com uma formação profissional no currículo? Parece bom demais pra ser verdade, né? Pois é. No ensino técnico do Senac, isso é possível. É ensino médio junto com formação técnica, que acontece durante os 3 anos. Lá, eles usam metodologia para projetos, desenvolvendo competências como resolução de problemas, pensamento crítico e colaboração, além de valores éticos e sustentáveis. Quer saber? Senac. Acesse sp.senac.br/ensino médio e saiba mais.
Hi there, I am Sarah Jane Case, and I'm the host of your new favorite show, Enneagram and Coffee. This podcast is dedicated to discussing the beautiful and hard parts of being human. We discuss the Enneagram, a personality map that is taking over the world, for increased self-compassion, personal growth, and healthier relationships. Listen to Enneagram and Coffee on the iHeart app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to Book Talk for Book Talk with Jack and Amy, a literary podcast where we deep dive into the writing of your favorite novels. We are currently in the middle of our 15-part literary analysis of A House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J. Maas, but we have a special bonus episode this week.
Today we are interviewing Olivia Muenter. Olivia is a writer and co-host of Bad on Paper, a weekly podcast about books, life, and everything in between. Previously, she was a senior fashion and beauty editor at Bustle.com. Olivia's work has appeared in Refinery 29, Huffpost, Glamour.com, and more. Today, we will be discussing her first novel, Such a Bad Influence.
Welcome to the podcast, Olivia.
Welcome.
I'm so glad to be here.
I'm so happy to talk to an author that kind of like mentally messed me up for a minute. That's
I keep getting that. It was kind of the goal, but I don't know, like not significantly the goal, but thank you.
You did it. You achieved it. You I don't want to say it. You didn't hurt my feelings, but you did bruise my brain.
Okay.
And I think that's the best way to describe it. Amy, it's kind of like a House of Leaves vibe.
Oh, House of Leaves. When I read the blurb on the back, so we divided and conquered. Jack read the book. I listened to the podcast, Bad on Paper.
Okay.
And when I read the blurb on the book, I was like, oh, as someone who's not on social media frequently and knowing Jack and her job is on social media a lot, I was like, this is gonna hurt. This is not good. But good in the best way because it's social commentary.
Yeah, it's dark.
Well, thank you. Yes, it is dark social commentary, which is my favorite kind. But also funny sometimes in the darkness. I tried to weave that in there too.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, but it's oh my God. I mean, like, first off, cover really lied to me. You can't use pink and purple and those like shades like that and not expect me to go into this with a like warm fuzzy. Granted, everything is like shattered on there, so I should have known. That's on me for not paying attention. But I really, really admire the characters that you have here between Hazel and Evelyn and the mom. And the mom will be referred to as the mom because she is dead to me. I want you to know that. Like,
a lot of people do that.
I was like, you know what? I can't with her. Like, anyway. But like, it was such a great, you're very talented in the sense that you are able to write characters that everyone has issues. No one's completely innocent here. You have various degrees of sucking on the page. And at the same time, I'm invested enough and want to keep reading these characters and wanting to know their journey. Like, that is such a difficult balance as an author, and you really nailed it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I kind of approach characters like I try to approach myself, which is that I feel like if I can understand like the worst part of me, quote unquote, or what I see as the worst or the most like shameful part, then I feel like I can understand myself that much better. And so that's probably why a lot of the characters are both really intolerable, but also there's relatability in there too. And there's like an engaging quality, I hope. So thank you. That means a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I'm suddenly sorry for any spoilers, guys, but like all of a sudden I'm like, wait, does this mean that you put things in people's rooms?
Oh,
that
no.
I'm like,
no. Well, there's a lot of me in certain characters, but the actual plot points of the book are completely fiction. I mostly just mean from a emotional, like trying to get
Yeah.
to know a character kind of way. No, I am not invading people's privacy and making horrible, abusive decisions, I would hope.
I was gasping left and right on this, and it was just it was such a journey, and you had some like really fun plot twists throughout the time. And I'll ask you about the other plot twist at the end of the book later, where it's like, again, I get the privilege to speak to the author, so I get to spoil it however I need to at the end.
Sure.
So, Olivia, speaking to this topic, because we read a lot of fantasy and romance for our podcast, I feel like we get a lot of romanticized flaws
Hmm.
and qualities in people. Everyone loves a good bad boy or a morally great character. And it sounds to me like you're walking a really fine line where you're a little more realistic and like these are morally great people and we should not be romanticizing them. What was the motivation? I know you said, looking inward, but what even started this journey on this with this book?
Yeah, I mean, I have had like a very small audience on Instagram for a long time that has grown very gradually, but has over time like taken up more and more of my job, I guess. So I was an editor and then I quit to go freelance and I quickly discovered that like freelance writing isn't necessarily the most lucrative career. So I had this audience and I became really obsessed with building it and making influencing more of my career because there is frankly so much more easy money in influencing than there is in writing. Like
Yeah.
by a lot, by a
Yeah.
very large degree. And I liked it. And like I liked engaging with my audience and building it and creating things. And it all is very fun to me and always has been. But I still struggled with like the just navigating my relationship with the internet
Mhm.
and feeling really frustrated and upset and like kind of haunted by the fact that like I could not figure it out. I was like still addicted. I still felt bad. I knew so much of it wasn't real and yet it felt real to me and I was on both sides of it and so I kind of just took all of those feelings and put them into this very specific format and it gave me this vehicle to really talk about our relationship with the internet as a culture in like a larger way.
It is an interesting experience where even with like our audience on like TikTok and on Instagram, TikTok, where we have more people there, but on our Instagram, they're like very passionate. And it is a surreal feeling when it's like, I feel like I know them and I feel like I get to talk to them where it's like, oh, I know that you just got a new dog, or I know that you are working right now, or something like
Mhm.
that. And it at the same time, you're like, "Oh, but I've also, like, never met this human either," but the relationship is still there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly like that. And there are people who I only know online, but I like feel like I'm friends with them and
Yeah.
there is so much value to like finding a community of people who love the same things you love. That's what I love about Instagram at its best is like
Mhm.
I found this world of people that make me feel so much less alone. And that's like the power in it, I guess. And that's the beauty of it. But there's this whole other side that's impossible to really figure out or break away from in a way because it's so much a part of all of our lives and jobs.
Yeah. And especially, like, the ones that we end up following their day-to-day lives, like, the person that kept popping up in my head is Alex Earl. I don't feel like I'm her older sister because, like, I don't know her, but you kept using that phrase where people would
Hmm.
come to Ellen and be like, "Oh, I'm like her I feel like I'm her older sister," or she's my older sister."
Hmm.
And it's one of those things where it's like you realize you've been following someone online in a blink of an eye, it's been 4 years, and you've seen them go through breakups and they post so much about their personal life, and it is such a different relationship than we have with celebrities. Like, I'm not going to pretend like I know Taylor Swift at all, but like I do know what Alex Earl was doing in her vacation this entire summer.
Yeah.
And that is such a like, I think the influencer culture is one of those like very interesting points because anyone can step into it with the right luck, timing, and talent.
Yeah, it's true. It's funny you mentioned Alex Earl because just this morning my husband looked at me like we were just drinking coffee and he's like, "Have you ever heard of Alex Earl?" And I was like, "Literally, what world do you live in?" And he just heard of her because he's watching some sports show and her, I guess,
Braxton,
boy, yes, exactly.
who plays for
Um,
the Miami Dolphins. Why? Why do I know these things?
yeah, I knew that, and I'm not even like a hardcore Alex Earl
Same.
fan, but yeah, it's true. I mean, it's like you get this intimate look into people's lives and then you love what you're seeing and like you feel like you know them and you still don't, like you can't, and that's the thing that's really hard about it. It's like even if they're showing you what is an honest portrayal of who they are, there's so much that you just cannot see, and so much of it is a performance, and so it creates this tension, I think, that I was trying to explore a bit in the book, I guess.
I mean, we need a you need a you didn't try here, Olivia.
You
You
achieved.
succeed. You achieved and then some here.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Like, especially at some points, I felt like as a reader and as someone who is chronically online, like Amy said, it's part of my like daytime job. I
Mhm.
was in social media before Vine, and I feel like I'm dating myself there. Whenever I say that to like the
I know
younger
what you
folks,
mean.
they're always like, "Oh my God." I'm like, "Okay, well, let's not be that surprised." And
I
it's
get it.
yeah, so it's like being online has always been my job. And
Mhm.
then with the podcast, like you can't have a podcast and not do social media. Like you have to promote it one way or another. And there were so many points where I felt called out, but not in a bad way. And I think that's again comes to talent. And it makes sense that you were a writer, freelancer, editor, because like very, very well written. And
Thank
it
you.
is it is one of those things where to have a reader look at this and read this and say, "I feel bad about myself, but I want more." It's I mean, even at one point you called out true crime like true crime podcasts. I used to live to listen to true crime podcasts all the time. My Favorite Murder was one of my all-time favorite podcasts. And, you even say things of like, "Is that an exploitation of the victims of everything?" And suddenly I was like, "Well, Olivia, I did not think of it that way."
Well, that also came from the fact that I have historically been a big fan of true crime and true crime
Mm,
podcasts in particular as well. And it was really important to me throughout the book that, like, it was an opportunity for people to think differently about their social media use and consumption, but it wasn't a judgment. Unless you're like,
yeah.
putting your kids online and like selling them out constantly, then I'm judging you.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I mean, for most of us, for me, like I'm struggling with these same things. I'm on, not anymore, but I was on the Reddit threads that talk about influencers
Mhm.
obsessively. I was consuming it as entertainment. I listened to true crime podcasts. Like, and so, I mean, I think this is reflected in the ending, but like, I think there's an intense amount of hypocrisy that goes into being online because I think people want to believe that they're doing it better. They're
Yeah.
managing it better than other people. They're not doing the shady things this influencer would do. If it was me, I'd do it so much better. And I don't actually think that's true. I think we're all struggling with the same exact things. Um, and so, yeah, so thank you for saying that. I wanted people to feel called out in a
Constructive?
more of like in a way like, oh, I'm more curious about this now in a different way than I was. Not like I hate myself. That's not what I was
No, I
going
mean,
for.
I walked away being like, "I suck." It was but, like, I love I the thing is, like, all of this, it evoked an emotion in me, and that emotion got me through the book. That emotion is what made me relate to the characters, judge the characters, but then judging the characters is part of the theme about, what are you doing? Judging people you don't know. And then, to really walk away and being like, "Oh, this is going to stick with me for a little bit." But again, it's what made me want to finish the whole thing.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think, well, that's a compliment. If I can invoke an emotion, that's really all I'm looking for. So thanks.
Yeah, I haven't felt like this kind of like, "Oh no," since House of Leaves, even though like it's not the same. I'm not sure if you read
I
House of
haven't read
Leaves.
that. No.
I don't recommend it.
Oh, I
It's one of
do. I do. I fucking love it. But
Well,
I
yeah.
haven't read it
anything
since college.
dark and that leaves me at the end. Like my favorite type of book, and maybe this will be reflected hopefully in Such Bad Influence, is like when I shut the book, I close the last page, and I'm like, wait. I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm like, I'm like, let
Okay.
me sit here and soak in that feeling for a second. And there's very few books that make me feel that way. So if this is one that's like that, I am definitely gonna read it as soon as possible.
I was gonna hold off on this ending spoiler, and I will bleep this out so listeners don't worry. At the very end, is that what actually happened? That I read it and I was like, okay, I need to go back and I need to look for the clues because either A, we find out at the end that was in fact the author of like this weekly newsletter where they collect money to find out like, oh, she's spilling all the gossip online. So either A, that was the case and there's clues that I missed the entire time, or B, said that on public television just to get the sympathy vote. Either way, it's
Do you want me to tell you?
yeah, yes, please.
So, yeah. So, firstly, that feeling that you have was slightly intentional because I did want it to be ambiguous in a sense, but that's how it is. But
Wow.
the whole point of it was to really make the reader think like, okay, well, I guess to hesitate and still wanting to blame, right? Which I guess
Yeah,
is kind of people's reaction when they're like, oh, it's just framing her.
yeah, yeah.
Ultimately, like Hazel did this thing and it was bad. But Evie also set her up on live television. Like it's
Mhm.
really spoilery, so you can cut whatever you need to cut. But and kind of like took it to this very extreme public
So
level, which is like
extreme.
exactly what Erin would do, the
Yep,
mom.
yep, yeah.
So in a way, it's like they were both sort of like messed up. Yeah.
Everyone here is like it's a big spot of just messed
Trauma.
up. Yeah,
Yeah.
trauma.
And I guess one way to look at it is like everyone's fucked up, which is true. But another way to look at it is like everyone's fucked up, and that's kind of like the unifying thing within all of this. Like
Mhm,
we're all deeply affected by social media and the internet, whether we think we are or not. It has changed the
Mhm.
way that we live, and that was kind of the point, I guess.
Can you talk a little bit more about Sabi and the fact that it is so Sabi on for this is not a spoiler, but Sabi is essentially a weekly newsletter that talks about all of the gossip going on in the influencer world. But that sounds like it's and I'm not like I don't follow any kind of newsletter. The second I saw it, I was like, oh, I don't doubt that that's something like that is real. And like the way that you captured the tone of Sabi was really good, where it's like this is someone who clearly needs these influencers, but you also need to kind of like shit on them a little bit in order to get readers interested. So, did you have to do a lot of research when it comes to like these newsletters or, I'm sure they popped up throughout your career and time online?
Um, Not really. It was kind of an amalgamation of there's a very famous, not very famous, but there is a notorious, I should say, message board that is sort of like the Reddit influencer snark groups, but it
Mhm.
is much, much more cruel. Like
Yeah.
there is, they often talk about bodies and weight. They talk about people's
Mm.
Mhm.
children a lot. It's like a very, very, very dark place. And that is, I won't even say it, but it's an acronym like that. And so that kind of gave me that idea to have it be an acronym. And I have a newsletter myself that I send out every week. And so actually like some of the newsletters were from drafts I had of my own newsletters that I just never
Mm.
used. Um,
Oh.
and so I thought it would be interesting to combine the two. I don't know of a newsletter that's exactly like Sabi is in the book, but it was kind of like something I could very easily imagine existing if I combined like
Yeah.
the gossip with like a thoughtful newsletter. Um,
One of our listeners is listening to this being like, "Holy shit, this is genius. I'm starting this now."
I don't know. It's like Lady Whistledown from Bridgerton, but for influencers in our
yeah.
world.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted it to be like the thing I wanted throughout the book is like I wanted it to be very clear that there are very real and valid criticisms of influencers, including
Mhm.
myself, and like those deserve to be called out. I think like there deserves to be some amount of accountability for like the things that influencers do that are shady, which a lot of the little like news clips that I put, like
Yeah.
this influencer did this in the Sabi newsletters, those are based on real things that I have seen many
Yeah.
times, or influenced. Not to, I keep using that word in interviews, and I'm like, that's so cheesy, you know. But it's kind of hard to avoid. And I wanted it to be like, I wanted there to be space for both. Like, there are both ways that I think influencers are, you know, criticized unnecessarily just because oftentimes it's a woman making a lot of money. And
Yep.
then also there are things
Yep.
that are really valid and deserve discussion. And, you know, creating that balance is difficult, but I think it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, it really it is possible. It is there. I mean, again, you're kind of like you said earlier, is like everyone wants to say that we do it better. You know, like everyone's like, well, you know, I'm not that attached to things, and then you start kind of like seeing it within yourself, and you're like, oh, damn it. Um,
Same.
You know, fall has officially started here in Los Angeles, and that means we finally get to do fall activities.
I have been counting down the days for when I can go to pumpkin patches, maybe even hit up an apple orchard, and I get to do all of it looking super cute in my Quince boyfriend sweater.
This weather is perfect for my dark academia vibes, and I'm so excited to bust out my washable silk blouse because you know I'm going to be taking pictures.
Quince is known for their Mongolian cashmere sweaters from $50. And that's not all. Quince has so many other amazing things on their website.
All of those items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands.
That includes leather jackets, cotton cardigans, soft denim. Like my entire fall wardrobe is genuinely turning into Quince wardrobe.
By partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the cost of the middleman, we get savings as the customer.
One of my favorite parts about Quince is the fact that they only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. And they still manage to get premium fabrics and finishes for that, you know, luxury feeling for every item that they have.
Get cozy in Quince's high-quality wardrobe essentials. Go to quince.com/booktalk for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's Quince, QUINCE.com/booktalk, BOOKTALK, to get free shipping and 365-day returns. That's quince.com/booktalk.
This is all very interesting, and I'm very motivated to read the book, partially because I work in higher education and my mother happens to work in higher education, and she works with at-risk populations of students who are less likely to complete their degrees for various reasons that I won't reveal on our podcast. But, you know, she talks a lot to these young people and asks them, "So what's your plan?" And they're like, "Oh, well, I'm gonna become an influencer." And
Yeah.
that's more and
Oh,
more in the
yeah.
conversation, you know, where when we were young, it was, "I'm gonna be the president of the United States," or "I'm gonna do what my dad did," or whatever the
Mhm.
case is. More and more young people see this romanticized life on social media and think they can all do it. And
Yeah.
that seems like a scary thing. And I feel like this book should be prescribed
It really should
to
be.
individuals like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's funny because it's like both a very accessible career, like in theory, anyone could become an influencer,
Yeah.
but it's
Mhm.
also not as easy as that at all at the same time.
Oh my God,
And
so hard.
even if it was, I don't know if people would really want it as much as they think they do. Or maybe they would. I don't know. But I think I get the sense that the influencer like industry is shifting a bit. But I don't know. We'll see.
I you know, working with influencers in my daytime job, like I've always said for years before, it's like I think it's becoming more known that it is a really hard job. And it like I would always be like, you like they don't have days off.
Hmm.
And we don't have days off, like just within our podcast. Now we work really hard to like plan ahead and to get ahead of schedule so that we give ourselves these weeks off and stuff. But like again, we're, you know, we're talking about books, not our lives and stuff like that. So we get to like, read the book at whatever given point. When you look at an influencer, and I'm going to just come back to Alex Earl, don't mean to pick on her. But when you look at influencers who their content is their daily life, or their content is, I mean, it's just content, like, and they
Yeah.
have to constantly produce. Otherwise, they're not part of the conversation anymore. And their job is to be the conversation. And it is like, I feel like whenever I talk to youths and they're just like, "Oh, I want to be an influencer." I'm like, "Cool. Do you want to never have a true vacation again?" Because
Yeah.
that's what you're signing up for, is to like never really have time for yourself, and not looking at your life and saying, "Oh, that's a good piece of content," or "That's something that I
Mhm.
want to do."
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, even speaking from my own experience, like it breaks your brain. Like it
Yeah.
absolutely changes how you interact with everything. Everything you buy becomes something that you can
Mhm.
sell. So then you shop
Mhm.
differently because you're like, well, I don't know if I need this dress, but I could probably make back the money that I spent on it if I link it.
Yeah.
Or I don't know if I really want this dress, but I know the affiliate like commission rate is really high for this brand.
Mhm. Mhm.
And or even like with me, I would be like, I would know like I might not love this dress, but I would know that it looked a certain way on me, like it looked quote unquote flattering or it made me
Yeah.
look thinner, and I knew that people would buy it more because of that. And so
Mhm.
it's like even if you're the most authentic influencer, if you have pretty strict boundaries with stuff, which I did, I'm pretty proud of that, but it still works its way into your like you just become a totally different being. Like you don't know how to interact with the world normally anymore. It's done. You're broken.
But it's also like business savvy brain too,
That's
like,
true.
like when coming back to Taylor Swift, everything kind of comes back to Taylor Swift with us.
I
I'm
mean,
sorry.
same. Literally
Yeah,
always.
and it's like I think as a community and as a fandom of Taylor Swift, we celebrate her strategy at this point, right? She comes out and says, "I'm a
Mhm.
businesswoman. Why is it that my planning ahead means I'm manipulative rather than just being a smart businesswoman?" And the same thing can be said kind of like what you're talking about with influencers. And again,
Yeah.
like I think this is important to say that it is related to women, because like the majority are women, and there's like, we can't pretend like there aren't sexist undertones to it, where it's like, well, what you're describing, it does break your brain, but or you can look at it as a business thought. Like, as authentic as you may be, at the end
Mhm.
of the day, influencers who are making a career off of this, it's a business decision. And if we can celebrate it with Taylor Swift and get all these incredible albums, then why can't we celebrate it with influencers and get all this incredible content?
Yeah. That's absolutely right, and it's a great point. I mean, it's and yeah, that becomes everything you share because everything you share does affect your business. You know, like I think in the
Mhm.
book I talk about like if you like I forget what it was. If you dye your hair a certain color or something
Yep.
before you are doing a hair campaign, or you
Yeah.
publicize you're going on a diet and then you do some sort of self-love campaign for like a
Mhm.
body wash brand, or which I feel like that's always what it is. It's like love
Yeah.
yourself, also buy this lotion. Um, but it like it affects everything, and like even like having certain political stances or whatever, or and
Mhm.
voicing those in a very specific way, sure, those might be the real core beliefs of that influencer, but at the same time they're making a calculation as to like what this gets them. Like does this make them look better? You know,
Yeah.
this also will have pushback. Is that pushback worth it? Like you're calculating constantly.
Will brands wanna partner with them? Yeah.
Exactly. It's a constant calculation, everything you do.
Calculation and business moves. Like,
And
I think
yes, yeah,
that,
like you said.
like, it comes to, it just is I mean, not unfortunate, I don't know if that's the right word or not, but it's just, it is what it is that these business moves are intertwined with someone's personal self, their looks, their actions, and everything
Mhm.
else. Like, whether it's for better or for worse, like it just is that way. And, I'm hoping that people understand it more. I know over the years, I've heard like occasional influencers come out and say, like, this is a hard job. Like, this isn't easy. And the amount of crap that they get of like, well, you're fortunate. And it's like, yes, they are fortunate, but like two things can be true at once. Like someone can be very fortunate to have that platform in that life, and it could also be really hard.
Yeah. No, definitely. I always go by the phrase for influencing that They work really hard, but it's not hard work. Like
Yeah. Okay.
and
Yeah.
that is it. Like I think there are a lot of influencers who are unbelievably talented, work around the clock, work really hard. But like at the end of the day, I having done it, like I know how much I've been paid for partnerships that have taken me like no time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's staggering, honestly. Like it is truly shocking. But at the same time, these people are, again, like I said, providing these communities that for other people that love the same things, that see
Hmm.
themselves reflected in this creator, in this creator. And that is so valuable as well. So I think it's this idea of like, if you do have a business mind, if there is strategy, if there is calculations, is authenticity possible within that?
Hmm.
I think no, but I don't
Yeah.
think that like authenticity should be like a moral gauge of someone either,
Yeah.
which I think it has
Yeah.
kind of become. Uh, yeah, very interesting.
I mean, it's not like, I mean, maybe the adjustment in the consumer of influencers is not that we're here buying into an authenticity. Rather, we're here to buy into what we're previewing and what we're viewing. It's
Hmm.
no different than this week's episode of Game of Thrones, this week's episode, what's for the movies. Like, we're not mad when we watch a reality TV show or we watch anything else online, like that's like, well, this isn't authentic to me.
Hmm.
And, you know, like, if it has to be like on the consumer's part too, to like shift their mindset of like, hey, what you're getting is not what you're seeing. Like, I think when it comes to like, when like for Amy and us, like we try to be as again, like I don't consider us influencers. We're more podcast, like we focus more on the podcast. We do not go with the influencer side as hard as we should. Um, but like we try to be as authentic and possible as us and stuff, but like we're still trying to be more articulate than I am on my everyday life,
Of
like
course,
trying
yeah.
to be something that like I can't hold
Hmm.
24/7.
Yeah.
So to that point, Olivia, I know that you joined Bad on Paper a couple years ago, and based on what I've heard on the podcast, I think I've listened to 5 or 6 episodes. It feels very authentic. It feels like a genuine conversation between you and Becca, your co-host. And how is that different or the same as how you present as an influencer? And how did it at all influence your writing as you're drafting this book?
Oh, good question. I mean, I think when I joined Bad on Paper, I was like, at first I was really nervous about saying the wrong thing,
Yeah.
which I think is partially born out of like being able to like record a story on Instagram and then watch it back and be like, no, let's go again. And so with a
Mhm.
podcast, it's not so much like that.
Yeah.
Um,
You
but
pray and wish with editing. You're like, there you are. Yeah.
I know. And at the beginning, I would be like, oh, can you edit out this like one phrase that I said or
Yeah.
whatever? And now I'm just like, whatever, let it roll. Um, but ultimately, I think it was like so refreshing to me to be able to talk at length about something and to communicate nuance like in my tone and to not just have a 60-second clip on Instagram that's supposed to encapsulate everything I feel about a subject.
Mhm.
So it felt really, honestly, like amazing. But I mean, the same shit happens there. People are like, oh, she talks too much about this, or I don't really
Yeah.
think that Becca and her are friends, or like,
Yeah.
there's a Reddit podcast snark thread that's the exact same thing as influencer snark, and
Oh,
so and it's just it's a lot of the same, but ultimately, like I've really enjoyed it.
yeah.
And the community is so amazing. I'm sure you guys know as well. Like it's just such a special feeling to like
Mhm.
find your people. And like whenever I
Yeah.
Yes.
meet Bad on Paper listeners, I'm like, oh my God, we're the same. I'm like,
Same.
it's so amazing. And like I've done a couple group trips.
Mhm.
Um, and I was like, who knows who will show up to this thing? But a lot of them were podcast listeners. And like everyone just loves the same things and is passionate about the same things. And like it's so hard to find that, like so hard.
Mhm.
So the podcast has been the biggest gift in the world. It's the
Yeah.
best.
It is such a like I feel like podcast its own little bubble of community
Yeah.
that it's able to provide, and I get it. Whenever I meet a listener, I'm like, "Oh my god, a friend that, we're just finally able to communicate both ways now." And
Yes,
I think
exactly.
So I want to shift the conversation a little bit towards mental health, because I feel like there's no way to talk about online without talking about mental health. And I think that not only do you do a good job of that, right? Of showing the repercussions of, like, have of not just the influencer themselves being like, I have to look a certain way, I have to do this, but as the consumer, where it's like Hazel, who's not online, she is very much like, how come I don't look good in this dress? How come I don't have this same feeling, and I don't like look, that's not the same. Or yeah, I just don't look the same. Like, that's, I mean, it always comes back down to looks, right? And then I feel like you do a great job depicting different versions of depression and how that manifests, be it eating disorders, be it drinking, be it depression of like you just can't clean your room or wash your hair properly or anything like that. But you have a really good grasp and a good range of how mental health really pops up with everyone.
Thank you. Yeah. I guess, like I said, I just felt like we all have these experiences. We all have these parts of ourselves.
Mhm.
For me, it's like mostly manifests as like intense anxiety. And like I've had a lot of issues with food over the years as well. Um, and so it felt natural to me to like weave those into the story
Mhm.
about the internet, because so much of it is triggered by things I see online
Yeah.
personally. So it would make sense for me that like Hazel was experiencing this feeling, and that Evie was experiencing it in a totally different way. But also, like, there's so much overlap there. I mean, not to toot my own horn, but I think if there's one thing that I feel comes naturally to me, it's like writing about emotional experiences, just because
Mhm.
I've written personal essays about my own for so long
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
I feel like it is something that comes more naturally to me than other things. So I really appreciate that.
I think something I've seen in my own life and in people around me is that some of us are very acutely aware of what depression looks like for us. And for other people, they're like, oh no, I'm just not feeling it. And it's hard for them to articulate, like, no, I'm actually in a depressive episode right now, and these are the
Mhm.
symptoms of that. And so I think, it's good and valid and necessary to put these things into media so that people can begin to understand the language of this is depression. This is something that I don't have to endure. I can work on, I can get
Mhm.
help. So I always appreciate the inclusion of discussion about mental health
Yeah.
and therapy and
Yeah.
seeking assistance.
Yeah. I wanna jump in, like, there's even, like, one character, the mom, Erin, so she at one point, she starts going to therapy, and it's almost like one of the most messed up characters is going to therapy, and I just, like, I don't, it's such an interesting choice that you made there of having truly one of the most abusive, horrible people doing the thing that we always associate with, like, positive mental health. And that was like, I kind of like had to take a step back in that moment of being like, what what is this? And I'm going to mull this over for a long time.
Well, I mean, who among us doesn't know someone who's in therapy and you're like, you should probably get a new therapist. But
Yeah.
so it was a little bit of that. And I do think that even though Erin is so terrible, I think that I tried to at least like paint a picture of someone who is a little more layered than just this,
Yes.
like stock bad guy cartoon villain, basically, even though she has a little bit of that maybe. But I mean, I think that maybe this therapist wasn't the right one for her, but I think that there's some inkling of her that even if I think her choice to go to therapy was probably never like a completely genuine, valid, like
Mhm.
one in which she wants to heal her relationship with her daughters. I think like one day she could maybe get there, decades from now. I don't know. I like to imagine that, but yeah, I support therapy for all people, and I
Yeah.
think I also support finding the right therapist because
Amen to
I
that.
mean, it takes a few tries, I feel like, to find the person who you click with, and
Yep.
that's okay.
Yeah. So I think yes, you did a good job of showing the layers to Aaron, and I think the thing that was hard for me to get, like, where I was like, "No, dead to me. I'll never get into this." Well, I mean, it kind of happened early on, and that's where I want to get into is the exploitation of children
Hmm.
online and the layers of exploitation that parents do where these kids who are online since a very young age. That's our main character, Evelyn. She was, or Evie, and she has been online since she was 5 years old, has grown up entirely online, and we've seen that so much, and especially since the internet has now been around for a pretty long time, we've seen a lot of these people, like these kids, grow up, and there are no laws protecting them. There's no laws about how much money do they get? How much do parents have to give them? How, like, what are the child labor laws? How many, like, are they allowed to take breaks? How many days of recording are they allowed to do? And that's just one side of it. I'm just going to go rant and then have you talk about it. And then you have the obvious layer of sexual exploitation where parents can't be ignorant. They know who's commenting, they know
Hmm.
who's watching this stuff. And yet, that's who's getting you views and engagement.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, all very true. And I mean, I don't know. I think there are small things happening. Like Illinois just passed a law that's basically like your child is part of your content, they are entitled to a certain portion of the money that
Oh,
they earn.
nice. Nice.
But I mean, like, I don't anticipate like that becoming a nationwide thing very soon. I mean, look at how long it took for like child actors to really
Yeah.
have any control of their finances. And I think it's honestly more difficult because of all the stuff we've already talked about, which is that so much of this is not looked at as a job. And
Mhm.
so when it's just like you view it as the same as like someone putting a photo of their kids on Facebook, because like, it's like they're already doing their thing and you're just there taking photos.
Mhm.
Um, it it gets really murky in there, I think. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's a slippery slope with kids on the internet, and I think it starts out as one thing, it becomes this bigger thing, and it's really hard to know where to draw the line when everyone is doing it differently in terms of parenting. I mean, like, I think of the people I know, influencers and not, like, there are people who show their kids online but don't share their names. There are people who show their kids online
Yep.
but don't share their faces but share their names. There are kids online who
Yeah.
don't share their faces but have different names that they just use online for their kids.
Mhm.
And there's such an intense level of judgment when it comes to parenting,
Mm.
and I don't have kids, so I was like, I don't want to project that onto people. But I do think that like if the book makes anyone sort of pause and like assess like a plan for how how
Yeah.
they're going to do this, like I think that's the part that like is important, because I can imagine if you're used to sharing your kid online,
Mhm.
influencer or not, you're used to people being like, how cute, how adorable. Like that also is a dopamine rush, and it's really hard to like cut that away from yourself once you're like addicted to it. So
Yeah.
it's hard. But I think that, everyone needs to do better. And to speak to like the sexual exploitation part of it, I mean, there are more and more like reporting, there is more and more reporting, excuse me, coming out
Yeah.
about like the men that follow these accounts.
Yep. Yep.
And um it's disgusting. I mean, it's disgusting.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's
And
horrible.
it's not illegal. That's the other thing. It's like
No.
it's not illegal, and then some of these moms, not every mom, like to your like not wanting to shame every, mom who like makes that choice, but there are some moms who, and I'll use what Erin did, was like, rather than some of the real world examples I know of, use compromising photos in the sense of gymnastics, and they're in their gymnastics uniform, and interesting how
Mm.
those are the ones that perform the best, or the thumbnail is going to look a certain way, and there's a popsicle where it's like, I know
Mhm.
you know what's
Yeah.
happening, like there's no world where you're ignorant of what's going on. And I don't know, like, this is like my judge, like, you're doing a better job of having, like, like, hey, like, let's like look at everything. I'm over here, I'm like, screw you, those women.
No, I mean,
I'm
that's
not yelling
valid.
burn in hell, but you are not in a good place right now.
That's totally valid. I mean, I think that there is a level of like, I'm gonna stick my head in the sand and not, um, and not acknowledge the reality of what this is, because, and I think I touched on this like in one of Aaron's like final like big monologues. It's like there's a very easy argument to be made that's like, well, what am I supposed to do? Just hide her away from the world because there are people out there who are sick? And it's like, maybe.
Yeah.
It's like that actually is kind of your responsibility. And yes, like, there are always going to be bad people. There are always going to be questionable, criminals out there, who, find a way to manipulate photos and stuff on the internet. But like, do we really want to make it easier for them? I would say no.
Right.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for I mean, I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I thought, like, again, like, I walked away from this book having a lot of feelings and a lot of emotions and a lot of like, I'm going to have to reflect on this. And when I have that, even if I feel icky about myself, when I have that, I'm like, yep, that's a good book. Like, you did it. You nailed it. I don't want, like, I got to walk away feeling like I got to walk away with feelings. And these are complicated feelings, not the ones that I'm necessarily used to. And, chef's kiss to you and for achieving that. And I've really loved being able to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this as well. This is great.
And I'm really excited to read the book. I'm finishing a different book right now, turning my attention to your book next.
No pressure.
And I hope that our listeners give it a try. Like us, a lot of our listeners read a lot of romance, a lot of fantasy, and this sounds like the type of book that needs to be in the zeitgeist and needs to be talked about. And I hope that people take that chance, even if it's outside their comfort zone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can you tell our listeners where they can find you and everything?
Yes, so I am at Olivia Muenter on Instagram. It's Muenter. I also have a Substack where I do bi-monthly essays about usually some form of the internet and big feelings, and mental health. And I also do tours of like people's offices, which is really fun. I have a podcast, which is Bad on Paper Podcast with my co-host and also fellow author Becca Freeman. We talk about books and life and pop culture and lots of fun things every Wednesday. And that's wherever you can get your podcast.
Oh, well, thank you so much again for coming on. And I always feel spoiled and privileged being able to talk to the author. So, yeah, I look forward to what you do next. And, hopefully we chat soon.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. Such thoughtful questions.
Thank you.
Thank
All right.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Book Talk for Book Talk with Jack and Amy. We encourage you to rate and subscribe to our show on your preferred podcast listening platform. Tomorrow, we're going to continue part 2 of this week's episode.
We would love to hear your thoughts based on today's conversation. You can submit your comments to our form at booktalkforbooktalk.com for a chance to have your feedback discussed during a future mini episode or on a Patreon exclusive episode.
If you're enjoying the podcast, please visit our website, booktalkforbooktalk.com, to view our latest merch and learn about supporting the show through Patreon or Venmo. You can find us on TikTok or Instagram at the handle @booktalkforbooktalk.
Bye.
Bye.
Fall has officially started here in Los Angeles, and that means we finally get to do fall activities.
I have been counting down the days for when I can go to pumpkin patches, maybe even hit up an apple orchard, and I get to do all of it looking super cute in my Quince boyfriend sweater.
This weather is perfect for my dark academia vibes, and I'm so excited to bust out my washable silk blouse because I'm going to be taking pictures.
Quince is known for their Mongolian cashmere sweaters from $50. And that's not all. Quince has so many other amazing things on their website.
All of those items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands.
That includes leather jackets, cotton cardigans, soft denim. Like, my entire fall wardrobe is genuinely turning into Quince wardrobe.
By partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the cost of the middleman, we get savings as the customer.
One of my favorite parts about Quince is the fact that they only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices. And they still manage to get premium fabrics and finishes for that, luxury feeling for every item that they have.
Get cozy in Quince's high-quality wardrobe essentials. Go to quince.com/booktalk for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's Quince, QUINCE.com/booktalk, BOOKTALK, to get free shipping and 365-day returns. That's quince.com/booktalk.